Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plaw Tech. And this week, I'm going to be at PowerShell Summit. So I'm going to be with the community, walking, talking about PowerShell. I have a few talks that I'm giving, one to the community and one about pair programming with Kevin Cephalou. So we're going to pair present. Very excited for that. And exciting announcement. The Jeff Hicks Code Challenge winner is going to be announced right now. But first, I want to shout out Jeff Hicks's blog post on the subject. Thank you so much to Jeff for creating the challenge and helping me with that. But the winner is Deadly Dog. Congratulations, Deadly Dog. You can get your prize from me in person at PowerShell Summit because I know you're going to be there. I'll have some lovely swag for you. Maybe message me your t-shirt size, PowerShell@pdq.com, or you can just hit me up since we're buddies. Check out the PDQ Discord, discord.gg/PDQ. It's been awesome to see new people joining. We have a pretty cool supportive community there. Check out the PowerShell scripting channel. I've been pretty impressed with the number of people. So it's interesting. There's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who aren't even using PowerShell yet. They're still kind of learning about it, kind of getting their feet wet. Some people are trying to get their first job in IT and are using it as sort of a resource to help them, I guess, learn different things. And it's been really cool to see. I got a comment from someone who said that after listening to the Clayton Tiger interview, they were inspired to actually start learning PowerShell. So it's interesting. There's people who are listening to the podcast who haven't started who are now choosing to. And that's so awesome to see other people starting their journey. And if you're listening out there right now and you haven't started, well, now's your chance. There's many others joining just like you. Beginners are very welcome in the community. I and many other people, including our guest today, love helping those people and sharing that journey and that passion we have for PowerShell with others. So it would be an honor if you could start your PowerShell journey today. You don't have to get any fancy, crazy skills or anything like that. You can just start and learn with us and make mistakes and get error messages just like the rest of us. It'll be all right. Want to announce something, a little bit of a bummer. Sorry, guys and gals. There's no more free 365 dev tenants. So they announced they're shutting down that program. That's a bummer. I'll have a link to some official announcement or something like that in the show notes. And yeah, kind of a bummer. But let's turn it up a little bit. Let's get a little happy because last week was the Jeffrey Snover episode. And oh my gosh, I can't believe we did it. So exciting. Recorded that one a few weeks ago. So sitting on that for a while, getting prepared for it was a whole thing. I'm glad it went well. I appreciate everyone reaching out with kind messages. And if you haven't listened to it, when you're done with this fantastic episode, check that one out because it was really cool to tap into his perspective. And I think we covered a good amount of different stuff that there will be something helpful for you to take away. And he's just such a humble and genuine guy. Very easy to talk to. I wasn't nervous to talk to him so much as I was nervous to just not do a bad job because I know that it's kind of a cool opportunity and I don't want to mess it up. But now that it went well, very excited, very relieved, attending PowerShell Summit, preparing for my talk. It's been a busy few weeks. But I want to highlight a blog now. And that is Bradley Wyatt's getting started with GitHub Copilot in the CLI. So it's gone GA, and he wrote an awesome blog post about that, thelazyadministrator.com. We love you, Bradley Wyatt. Tip of the week. Don't store your passwords in plain text. I know you love PowerShell. I love it too. But don't just save the password to plain text. There's solutions out there for you. In fact, I've written a blog post on it. But check out the Microsoft.PowerShell.secret management module, and you can connect that with a secret store like the Microsoft.PowerShell.secret store. There's a better way to go about things. Don't put passwords in plain text, please. We can avoid it. It's just not a good thing to do. Stop now. You won't have scripts that have it if you stop now. That being said, I want to highlight a video this week. But before I highlight that video, I would like to introduce our guest because this video is by our very special guest who we will be talking about the transition from Azure Cloud Engineer to DevOps. Jeff Brown, welcome to the podcast. Second time I had to do the introduction because the first time it was muted. Appreciate you sticking around and going through the wildness. How you doing?
Doing good, Andrew. Thanks for having me on. And I've done that so many times too, recording courses and stuff. I pause recording or not recording the microphone. Happens still all the time.
Yeah, but at least someone's not watching you laughing with their camera off. But it's all right. We're closer friends now. We can say we broke the ice well. But I wanted to highlight I want to highlight a lot of your efforts. But in particular, one thing that I've seen recently is some really cool YouTube videos from you. And the one that I selected for this episode was a coding session, enhancing PowerShell scripts with parameters and error handling. And I personally love that type of content where we're sort of sitting in the driver's seat with you, going through improving a script. And I think you have a lot of other really helpful content. But what was your idea with that coding session series?
The video right before it was about for each and CSV files. And I had that script. It's from a blog post that I wrote. And I looked at it. And I mean, for the blog post, I just wanted to keep it very simple example. I didn't want to get into too many things with it. But then I looked at it, I was like, oh, I could take this and make some improvements on it. Why don't I just do a video about that? Because I remember writing scripts before and being like, I'm always asking, how can I make this better? And I was like, well, why don't we just do a coding session and show people here a couple of things you could maybe do to make your scripts different or a little more reusable, or like I said in the video, a little more PowerShell-y, following those PowerShell practices and patterns. So that's where it came from. I looked at it and I was like, well, let's improve this a little bit.
I have a link to that in the show notes. People can check it out. But I want to get started with understanding the why behind why you started creating content and helpful stuff. I think you started with blogs and stuff, but now you've kind of branched out. But why did you get started? What sort of opened the door for you there?
I was thinking about that the other day. I think it really started back in about 2011. I was ready to try to transition out of my current role that I was in, and I'd been in for several years. And I wanted to have something that was beyond the resume, just a resume that I submitted somewhere. I was like, well, let's write some blog articles, actually have some stuff out there on the internet. At the time I was doing VB scripting. So instead of just saying, oh, I wrote a VB script to do something, I could be like, you can go here and actually see it and my thought process behind it. So that's where it really started, was just having an online portfolio of what I was working on or learning. And I tried to keep it to very specific things that maybe I'd learned or a problem that I'd solved. So I maybe had 3 or 4 blogs a year, if that, and then slowly turned more into more tutorial things of stuff I was learning, or just common things like here's PowerShell parameters or something like that.
I see that transition a lot, where it sort of just starts as kind of a personal resource, and then eventually it transitions into something where it's sort of more focused on helping the readers, which is cool. And I think that actually getting started in the easiest way, just creating resource for yourself, is a great way to then already have the platform in the process to whenever you're ready to share more things that are more oriented towards others, if that's the route you want to go. If you want to just keep using that as a personal resource, some people will really enjoy also tagging along for that ride, where you don't give more of an in-depth look. You just sort of are sharing little glimpses. I personally like that type of content as well. But so that's the blogging stuff. You said VB script. Like, you've been blogging for that long?
Yeah, I mean, my first junior sysadmin role was in 2007, and I had a really good manager who was really good at writing batch files, but was, that's insanely weird. And I think just like Jeffrey Snover was talking about, I listened to that episode just yesterday. You have to get your output, and it's 27 characters over on the second line to get the IP address of something, is very difficult. I looked at his scripts, I'd be like, I have no idea. But he set me down the path of VB script, and learning VB script and doing that for sysadmin automation. So that's where I got my scripting skills started, was with VB script.
Man, I know I've been seeing you put out a bunch of content for a long time. I had no clue it's been that long. That is very cool, man.
Yeah, no, that dawned on me too. I was like, man, that's been over a decade. Crap. That's been a while.
Has it been helpful for you to have that as sort of a resource? Not including the impact on others, but just for you, like to have that blog kind of working data set?
Yeah, because I'll blog about things, and it's my own personal wiki almost. I'll like, I know I've done this before, and I go back and I find it on the blog, or how did I do that? Like, I just don't have to remember too many things because it's just out there. And then it's also a great learning tool. I'll be learning something, like when I was going through and learning about Terraform a couple of years ago. As I would learn a topic, I'd take it and then write a blog post about it. And writing about things forces you to learn more about it. Even stuff about PowerShell that I'd used for years, like something, I was like, wait a minute, what is the difference between a hash table and like you make your own custom object? Okay, go research those two things, then write a post about it.
It's a great example. Yeah, it is so helpful to have that sort of reference. And whenever I'm writing blogs, I'm thinking about whatever snippets I put in it. That's exactly where I'm going to go the next time I need to refer to this. So I try and make those pretty good, because really, it's just like you said, like you go through the process, you learn something one time, then you can, create a PowerShell script for certain things. Otherwise, you kind of need to capture that learned knowledge. And whenever you read something you've already written, it's really quick to kind of pick it back up. Because in our careers, there's so much different stuff you've learned. Like you mentioned VB script, like, you don't have mental space to store all these different things. Using a resource like a blog really helps you free that up. So I encourage people to get started blogging. How do you have a fancy setup for your blog?
I try. I mean, I'm not a web designer. I just have a WordPress site hosted on a SiteGround, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
But I've gone through several iterations. I had a WordPress site at one point, then moved over to like Wix.com. Just usually stuff that's out of the box. There wasn't anything like GitHub pages, or something simple like that, like there is now.
Yeah.
So
that's what I've been driving people to, is the free setup in GitHub pages lately. It's kind of a quick way to get set up for free with, you don't even need to pay for the domain. You can get just a .github.io, which is kind of nice. And also get some in Git. That's kind of a challenge for some people.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the development of the blog thing. So you wrote it for yourself for a while, but eventually other people started reading it. How did you start making the transition into sort of helping others? Because it definitely seems like there's a vibe of you're really trying to help out the masses. Some of the content is more niche, I guess, but it seems like there's definitely been an effort to really help the masses.
Yeah, it was really weird. I wrote one blog post about some weird thing that was happening in a link server. And I never, at the time didn't really advertise it, just wrote the post or whatever and put it out there. And eventually I found someone linked to it on the old TechNet forums. Like, hey, here's your problem. Here's the solution. I was like, holy cow, that's crazy. Someone came across this for one and then is now sharing it with other people. I think around 2020, 2021, Adam Bertram, PowerShell guy, he started, ramping up what he was doing on his blog, Adam the Automator. And he wrote a series of blog posts on a different site, talking about how he was building his blog and actually started doing advertising on it and everything. And so I kind of looked at that and I was like, I've been doing this thing for a little while. Why not try to ramp it up and turn it into something a little bit more? And so that's when that really started, of almost trying to put out an article a week. I usually had a goal of maybe like 10 a quarter, and then was branching out just as a side hustle a little bit too, of, writing for SysOps and Varonis blog and a couple others out there. So that's when, it really ramped up, of just, writing content and treating it a little bit like a side hustle. And then also, just putting content out there for stuff I was learning at the same time.
It's exciting. That's a thrilling world to live in. How's it?
Yeah.
So at some point along the lines, you mentioned one blog kind of took off. How'd that feel? For me, it feels kind of like exciting and powerful to be like, wow, I'm helping people with something I did like in the past. It sort of was already part of my workflow. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's I guess sometimes, when you're working by yourself or in a vacuum a little bit, you don't know if what you have is good, or what you're doing is like best practices a little bit. So that's where I've shared a blog post before and have people comment on it. It's like, oh, this is good stuff, or make suggestions and you learn something new. They're like, hey, actually, this is what I do. And you're like, oh, that's actually even better than what I was doing. But yeah, it's really nice, especially with some of the stuff I put out there, to get a message on LinkedIn or X or Twitter and just saying, hey, this really helped me out, or watched a video. And yeah, it's just weird. It's weird to think about that people are out there consuming your stuff and take the time to then reach out and show appreciation. And it's just like, okay, cool. Like someone is actually watching it and it's good and it's useful. Still kind of weird sometimes.
Yeah, but it goes such a long way to get that positive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I've been shouting from the rooftops to people like the first way to get involved in the community if you've done nothing is to just say thanks to the content you consume and enjoy. Like just say thanks to those people. If they're using some project, whatever it is, just say thanks. It goes such a long way. But you have a bunch of stuff in all different places. You got blogs, you got YouTube, PluralSight.
Mm-hmm.
What courses do you have on PluralSight?
A lot of stuff over Microsoft Teams. Yeah, that was a good journey and everything because I got signed up with them to be an author. I kind of looked and I was I hadn't started learning Azure or anything yet. The PowerShell realm really, I won't say saturated, but it was covered by people like Jeff Hicks and Adam Bertram. It's like, man, how do you come up with something better than that? But then they were like, hey, we're going to do some team certifications, videos and everything. And I was like, that's exactly what I was working on at the time. And so it fit in real nicely. And it's been a really good learning experience. Prior to that, I did some courses for a platform called Cybrary, and that led into PluralSight too. The experience from there and helped out quite a bit.
What about in-person training? You ever done any of that?
No, the closest thing, I had a local user group over like Skype for Business. Did a couple presentations there, but I've never done in-person training though.
Seems like it might be a good fit there. Because did you think that you'd be an educator when you got started in IT? Did you think you'd have that little side adventure?
No, I mean, not at all. In a previous role, we would go down and talk to the service desk about new things and try to show them some new things, changes in what we're using, like Exchange and Skype for Business and Link. And those technologies be like, hey, this is coming out. We're making this change or helping them out with different things and doing some teaching that way. But it was very informal, just, with your coworkers. So didn't feel, official or anything like that. But yeah, I had no idea I'd ever be doing YouTube videos or writing blogs and stuff like that when, back in 2011 or prior to that, I guess, whenever before I started all this.
Yeah. It's kind of wild. So was Cybrary your first video content you did, or what was the first kind of decision? Like, okay, I guess I'm going to be on camera and say things. Because I think for some people that would be a big jump from blogging.
Mm-hmm. It was Cybrary. Around that time, I remember, I'm pretty sure it was Don Jones, going online and being like, hey, if you know more than somebody, talking from the PowerShell world or anything else, somebody more, more than, somebody new to PowerShell, and you can teach them something. Everyone's a teacher. You can be a teacher. And I was looking around at job postings a little bit, and I came across one that's like, hey, we're looking for somebody to do PowerShell content on our platform. I was like, perfect. So I applied and talked to them, and they're like, oh, you've got your Azure Architect certification. I was like, yes. And they go, you want to do a video training around that? I said, okay, yeah, sure. That's not what I thought we were going to do here, but and it worked out, and I put out a course for them in a very short matter. It was only demos and audio, so no video or anything like that. But that really helped prep. And if I had never, answered that and did that video series for them, I don't know if my PluralSight audition would have gone as well as it did to be able to, start working with them.
Audition.
Yeah. So I got referred to PluralSight from somebody else, another current author, and you have to submit an audition video just over anything you want, some technical topic. And I submitted it, and the author or the reviewer was like, okay, actually, I don't have any feedback for you. That was really good. So, welcome aboard. I was like, awesome, great. But yeah, it's just that, if I hadn't taken Don Jones's advice and applied for that one thing to do some PowerShell teaching, which led to that course, which went on through of, having a really good audition for them and be able to do courses for them.
Kind of highlights the impact of written word, right? Because I was also pretty positively impacted by a lot of the Don Jones writings at the time. And we're talking about your blog. It's pretty cool. I think you're kind of mentioning that, just having that encouragement or sort of like saying, hey, you kind of need to take the leap can be enough to sort of get you to actually take that next step.
Mhm.
That's I really love seeing when people do that in their PowerShell journeys or really life in general. It's really cool to see. But I want to talk about your transition because you just went through a career transition, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I've been trying to get into the Azure cloud world and then into DevOps, and finally made that transition for as an official title. But it's a like I mentioned earlier, teams and general sysadmin work. It's been a lot of different things along the way.
Yeah, I think for a while being in Azure was like really cool. And then eventually there was like the whole DevOps thing. And I think then that became like the kind of next frontier to deal with the cool technologies and interact with really interesting, complex systems. So it's really cool to see you make that transition. I think a lot of people out there listening who are in the PowerShell world also might be interested in a similar journey. So I'm curious to hear, like, it sounds like you sort of were preparing for a while to make that switch over.
Yeah, I can think. So, I mean, yeah, to give some context, I was working at Microsoft. I was a premier field engineer for Microsoft Teams. And I kind of really didn't see myself working in Microsoft Teams long term because there wasn't as much like nuts and bolts things to work on. So I started studying Azure, and this was 2019 or so, and getting some certifications and everything. But it was really difficult to shake that not title or anything, but just that appearance of, oh, this guy just knows Microsoft Teams. It's like, well, yeah, but I was a sysadmin for 12 years. I understand servers and operating systems and networking a little bit, and all those things. Kind of all anybody saw was, oh, Microsoft Teams. But yeah, I kept moving through and finally was able to make the transition in a role thanks to a great manager who knew I wanted to move into the Azure world, and there was another opening at the company I was working at to transition over to being an Azure engineer. And even though I didn't have much experience in Azure, I was able to interview with the technical lead on the team and still answer all the questions because I'd put in, year and a half, 2 years worth of work and certifications and self-study and everything on things that weren't, relevant to my current job, but it's what I wanted to be, where I wanted to be and what I wanted to learn. So yeah, just talking things about things about Azure and infrastructure as code. It was just ARM templates at the time, and yeah, just putting in that work after a long time and finally being able to seize on an opportunity to work over in an Azure in another role.
Now, were you blogging? You said certifications and stuff. Were you blogging about that process as well?
Not so much specifically about certification, but about a few things about what I was studying. Maybe some things about networking or ARM templates. I was doing a few things about that. But yeah, nothing specific about certifications though.
And I want to highlight something really cool because, highly contested topic. Are certifications helpful? Are they not? I think you've pointed to a few instances in your journey where certifications have absolutely been helpful.
I believe they are because for me, they give a structured way and a goal of what to learn. If you don't know the name Mike Pfeiffer, he's kind of a PowerShell. I think he's spoken at Summit before. And he was a big Azure guy, and he would always he'd point out there's like 5 pillars in Azure. There's compute, networking, storage, identity governance, those type of things. That's everything on the Azure administrator certification, and it's very structured, and they give you the basic things to learn about. So I've always used certifications as, oh, I want to go learn this thing. Is there a certification for it? Yeah. Okay. So now there's probably good published structured learning around that from places like PluralSight or blogs or maybe some stuff on YouTube, and being able to use that as a learning method. And then getting the certification is just a bonus, but I use it as a guiding, to guide me through the content on what I should be learning.
I think that's a good approach. And I think that's one that more resonates with me. if I were to go for a cert right now. Because I just don't like the idea that I have to pass this one thing to prove I know it or this or that, but it's more about this is how you can approach learning this subject matter. And this is the way that Microsoft kind of thinks is best that you should go about learning it. And these are the core bits. And yeah, there's a cool cert at the end, and it may or may not lead to professional growth, but it can't hurt, especially when you pair it with some kind of public presence where you're like, not only can I pass the test, but also I can communicate about the subject matter and actually show that I understand it to a certain degree. I think that really helps boost your image, I guess, or whatever you bring to a role.
For sure. And that's what I did with, we talked about the certification part, or blogging about it. I guess I didn't do that so much with Azure, but I did that more with Terraform. When I was learning Terraform, I mentioned that earlier, just being like, okay, here's what I learned this week, and here's the little lab I put up, or here's some Terraform code, and just putting it out there in a blog post. So yeah, for sure, taking what you're studying, because it's structured, and then putting something out there just makes you learn it a little bit more.
So now that you are not in the Teams world, what was it like? Did you enjoy Microsoft Teams as a product? I know it's gotten a lot better over the years. I haven't used it in a while, but do you have a take or no?
Yep. Yes. So I was at Microsoft from 2018 to 2020 doing Microsoft Teams stuff, and that's when it was still very new. And Skype for Business Online was still a thing next to it. Yeah. And it was just frustrating because I would be working with my customers and they're like, hey, when is this feature coming out? I'm like, it's coming, in 3 quarters maybe. And there's like, well, we can't start using Teams. We'd love to get off Skype for Business Online, but we can't use Teams until this feature is there. And there's, I'd work with one customer every week. Hey, when is breakout rooms coming to Teams? Like, it's coming. They're working on it. I don't know. So that was the most frustrating thing at the time. Working with Teams was just, it wasn't feature parity with Skype Online just yet. And so trying to get companies to move to it, they're just like, well, not until this, and this is there. And sometimes kind of wondered on the features that they focused on. It's like, yeah, that's cool, but admins really need this, or the customers really need this, or something like that. I think it's fine. Obviously the integration with everything else inside of Office 365 is what really gives it a good value add. But if I were to walk into a company and they had Slack, I'm like, okay, we're using Slack, we're using Zoom. I don't care either way. It's just a tool to me.
Yep. I like custom emojis though. Definitely. Hopefully they add that to Teams one day, but I won't know for now. Awesome. Well, you mentioned that you were doing a little bit more YouTube content these days. Mm-hmm. What type of stuff are you trying to do, or what is your goal with the YouTube channel?
It's to take some of the blog content that I've done and just turn it into video form. And what I noticed at one point is I did some videos many years ago, and I noticed that one of them had so many more views than a similar blog post did over that period of time. I'm like, okay, so maybe video is just a better way of getting some content out there for more people to see. And it can be potentially easier to do than blog post, because writing a blog post, you have to write everything out. You're taking screenshots or annotating screenshots and stuff like that. But just recently, I use Camtasia for recording everything. And they've got a new product out that makes editing a lot easier. Because that was always the hard thing, especially when I was doing my PluralSight videos. I did all my own editing because I'm cheap and trying to save money. Instead of hiring someone to edit the videos for me, which I finally did on one of my last courses, and I wish I'd done it a long time ago because it was so much better. But I did all my own editing, and it was frustrating, and that's what took the most amount of time. But now they've got some new stuff out that makes editing so much easier, that I can do it myself pretty quickly. And just being able to walk through, I'm just finding it easier than typing out a blog post and taking screenshots and going through all that. So yeah, it's just another avenue to get stuff out there.
Nice. Yeah, I was thinking about recording some with OBS, but if Camtasia sounds better, I'm all for it. And it's also kind of nice because once you get into a nice workflow and figure out your tools, you can kind of just sit down and go with some bit of code or with some general structure, and you have enough experience, you can just kind of go through.
Yeah.
Now, these days, you mentioned you're doing a bunch of Terraform stuff. I'm curious to understand what role PowerShell played in getting you to where you are. Obviously, it can't be the only reason. They're like skills that kind of build on top of it. But was PowerShell like helpful for you to be able to really understand systems, or where did it help you out in this sort of transition?
I think it helps in maybe just in programming in general of just problem solving and being able to do things in automation a little bit. Yeah, I'm trying to think of. I think just being able to learn how to solve problems and program and do different things and some of those core things like data types or just basic logic statements. That's all stuff I really honed in PowerShell. And then those same skills have just transferred over into working with Terraform. It's not scripting, but you're writing out code, I guess. But it has stuff in there. There's kind of for each loops, and there's basic if statements. So being able to have little tricks in your back pocket of doing that type of thing and understanding it does translate a little bit. But I think it's just working in PowerShell for so long and scripting in general, just you develop a mindset of how to handle errors. Okay, if this doesn't go well, how can I handle it? And that's something I always try to think about is making things resilient, sustainable, reusable, and learning all that in PowerShell just kind of starts filtering out into other things that you might end up doing.
Do you have what's your next goal? Do you have a next goal in mind now that you kind of reached this get into DevOps goal? Do you have a next one you're sort of thinking about?
Getting into this DevOps role and working a lot closer with developers. It's been a long-term goal of mine to always learn something like C#. And I say quote unquote a real programming language. That's not shade at PowerShell. I mean, I think it's programming, what we do, writing scripts and everything. But being able to say like, oh, let's write a PowerShell module in C# or something like that. So I think getting into that is really. I've been thinking, I've only been in this role, but maybe 6 weeks or so. That's kind of my next thing. That's kind of on my mind. It's like, okay, let's get more on the developer side of this, like true developer, and just really get into that. Because for years, I was like, oh, let's learn C# or let's learn Python or something like that. It's just never, it has to be a daily thing almost. That's where I submitted PowerShell so much as I was working in Exchange server and Link server. Just all day at the prompt, doing stuff, checking servers, user accounts, policies, stuff like that. So it's just got to become a daily thing. But that's kind of the next thing is let's get really into the developer world.
That's exciting. So you seem like you're pretty good at learning these days. You've learned a bunch. You've kind of moved around a bunch of different roles. You're currently in the process of kind of getting comfortable with a new environment, at the very least. Similar technologies, I guess. But what does your learning process look like? I guess first we'll ask about, so say you're studying for some cert or some new skill not related to your current role. What does that training process look for you? Do you wake up early? Do you what?
Yeah, usually before starting work, I've been working remotely the last couple of years, so that's handy. Starting before my actual job of getting online and finding a course, some type of video course is just where I start, watching that, seeing what they do, learning the concepts, following along in their labs, trying to recreate stuff myself if I can. I feel like going to video courses is usually my go-to. And then that filters out into, okay, well, here's a topic. Let me go read the documentation on it or find some other blog articles about it. But for the longest time, I've always had some type of home lab, even if it's just a single little Intel NUC at one point, or in NUC, to where it's just running Hyper-V and putting some VMs or something on it, or trying to think what else. But then, now in Azure, you can spin up a few things and then spin them back down to kind of keep the costs low. Just trying to think what else. Yeah, it's usually starting with video courses, and if there's certification, like I mentioned earlier, just following those outline there.
I think that you kind of pointed out a very helpful learning tip for people, which is to get hands-on experience, right? Mm-hmm. You're mentioning a home lab. I think that a mistake I made early on in my career is I'd watch these things and think that, okay, the first watch through, I'll just understand it and then I'll be able to do it. And then by the end of it, you're not actually hands-on and you've kind of missed some concepts that you would have learned otherwise. So having some kind of area to safely learn, right? You can do whatever you want on these VMs and just recreate them. It's no big deal, but you need that kind of safety net to experiment with these things and an environment to do it. And with cloud stuff, sometimes it will cost a little bit of money. And it is worth investing in yourself. Just make sure you turn things off and you set your limits.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of cloud things, if you're just getting started, usually there's, at least a 1 month, Azure does $200, free sign up or whatever your first month. And there's lots of other services for free. There's lots of stuff you can create that ends up not costing you anything too. Virtual networks, as long as you don't have any data coming in and out, storage accounts, just lots of different resources like that you can create for free. And that's where I would do Terraform things, writing out infrastructure as code. It's like I can deploy these things all day long and it's not going to cost me anything, and then tear them back down when I'm done. But yeah.
Terraform's a pretty sought after skill. It's a pretty handy one to have on the resume.
Yeah. A couple of years ago when I was looking at trying to transition this, out of that Teams Office 365 area, it's like, okay, Terraform's a big thing, and started learning it. And it's definitely, at the time it was better than things like ARM templates, but now they've got Bicep, which is very Terraform-like. So that's definitely handy. But it's just, trying to pay attention to stuff like that, and just seeing, what I might need to learn in the future, be helpful or just interesting.
Yeah. And when you actually have hands-on experience, when you go to the interview, you can actually talk about real things you've done and bring an actual perspective rather than just being able to mention the terms that are included in the documentation, which I imagine is really helpful. Were you blogging about Terraform as well?
Yeah, I did a little bit, and was putting a couple of things out there. And just like you mentioned there, I would be in an interviews and be like, okay, see you've got some Terraform certification, or you've done some things here. What do you like about Terraform versus something like ARM templates? And being able to give an answer and be able to know enough to compare the two. It's definitely good coming from that, because you're actually doing the experience and I've tried both out. Going back to the hands-on thing, not just watching the content and watching the labs, actually going through them with yourself can definitely help out when you're looking for that next role.
Do you have your blog on your resume?
Yes. Yeah. I have the main URL.
Which is?
jeffbrown.tech.
I love that. Now, I'm Andrew Plott, and my website's andrewplott.tech, and my handle's andrewplott.tech. So I really respect your name choice. And I wonder, where did this come from?
For the longest time, Jeff Brown, that's about as a generic name as you can get. So like jeffbrown.com is taken, Jeff, my middle initial brown.com is taken, different stuff like that. So finally, when however many years ago they opened up more domain names, the top level domain names, I saw tech and I was like, Jeff Brown Tech, I can personalize this finally. And so I grabbed it real quick. So that's where that came from. Is just having such a generic name, and trying to find something unique that I could actually use.
That's funny. So my Twitter name was Andrew Plott Tech for a while, because I was like, I'm kind of in tech. Like this, I like technology was what I was thinking. And there's another Andrew Plott who has andrewplott.com, and he's a lighting engineer. So he does like lighting for shows and stuff. And he's like the same age as me almost. And you know what? I'm happy for him. But even with a unique name, somebody out there will snag it from you.
Yeah,
But it is nice.
I would have thought yours was unique enough. But yeah, like my Twitter handle is Jeff W. Brown because that's before I ever thought of Jeff Brown Tech or anything. But everything since that I've tried to do Jeff Brown Tech. Yeah, there's a hockey player, an author. There's a tech investor guy. All the same names.
Nice.
So
yeah, I have it on my bucket list that someday I'm going to meet this other Andrew Plow and just hear about what's it like being you, Andrew Plow. It's funny. Well, sorry, I'm off in lighting engineer land. I will say that .tech domain, doesn't it cost a little bit more than the regular .coms?
I think it just depends more on what the first part of your domain is. It's not too bad. I think mine just renewed not too long ago, and it was maybe $20 or $30 for the year. I think probably when I bought it originally, it wasn't that much, but
that's how they go, right?
Like
charging more for a domain name. Well, I want to talk about something that I enjoy, and in doing some research for this show, I found out that you enjoy as well, and that's Azure Functions. Any chance I can chat about these and tell people about them and hopefully get some new users, because they're just so exciting once you get running with them. But you have some experience with Azure Functions?
Yeah, I worked on a project last year for my last employer where it's funny. It was for updating our user offboarding process. And I feel like I saw somebody mention once, like, user onboarding, offboarding is kind of like the hello world of automation. It's kind of the first thing you ever work on, especially PowerShell. That was my first PowerShell script, was enabling Exchange mailboxes for new users, so it never goes away. But yeah, we had there was a process in place that was slightly automated, but wanted to make it a little more robust. So we had a logic app as kind of the orchestrator of the different steps. And there's some built-in things in logic apps, connectors that will do some stuff for Azure AD or Entra ID and other tasks. But for everything else that it couldn't do, I went and wrote in PowerShell and an Azure function just to call the function to go like reset a user's password. That's not a built-in action for logic apps. So wrote a custom function to go do that. So that's where it's really nice of just, hey, I need a small piece of code to go run something for me and be able to call it from anywhere is pretty awesome.
It is super awesome. And just to clarify, so Logic App is a way that you can like orchestrate automation and steps, and it can do some things, but not everything, which is where you can then have a step in Logic Apps to call a function, which is your Azure function, which has your PowerShell code to do exactly what you need to do. So it kind of extends things, which is what I love about it, because you can extend so much. You get this execution environment that you can it's like a REST API. You can just interact with it, and it can do things that, you can change context that you're sort of working in. It's really cool how it can be used, because, PowerShell's like duct tape sort of thing, can tie things together. When you empower it with REST, with Azure Functions, it's, to me, just actually limitless what you can sort of accomplish.
Yeah, and it was and just being able to have a URL endpoint to call it, so just like you're saying, call it from anywhere, and including other programs. So at the time, really using a logic app to do it, but could easily call it from some other, maybe you're using some identity management provider and want to call it from there to reset someone's password. It's like, oh, you don't have to change anything. Here's your URL to call it, and pass it, a JSON body or something like that potentially, and run it, and you're good to go. Doesn't matter what the function's running under.
Yeah, I had an ITSM solution we used that like built into it. You could do API calls, and we use that for a lot of very interesting, helpful things for our environment and our objects and all kinds of cool stuff. So definitely check out Azure Functions. They're not that hard to get started with. Just kind of follow a guide, and you can get started, do a lot of cool things. There's a couple of variables, and I think the way it handles some things you'll want to read about, but I love them. And they're pretty cheap too. That's another really big thing about them. They're very inexpensive.
Yeah, you put it on a if you do even just a consumption Azure App Service plan, I think you might get like 10,000 executions for free or something. I mean, don't quote me on that, but you get a good amount of executions for free initially before it starts ever charging you. And you're just like, this is just free compute right here to do. I mean, I'm sure they imagine, people are actually using them for microservices, to call them thousands of times a day. It's like, no, my app's going to call it maybe once a day, and I'll be good to go.
What is one pro tip, one helpful bit of advice that you would give to an Azure admin? Maybe a feature they're not using, maybe something in the billing portal.
Billing is good. Like I just saw, it made me go look at our own spend because I saw an Azure or a sysadmin thread on Reddit or something about, we got hit with a surprise Azure bill, and it's going in and looking at your billing and making sure everything looks good. I just found an unused resource that wasn't being used and was one of the more expensive ones in a subscription. So, our Azure spend right now is small. And here's my joke is like, I got rid of this one resource and it reduced our cost. It's going to reduce our cost maybe by like 15%, every month. I mean, it's like $300, but the percentage sounds better. But, just one is just, watch your spend, know what things cost, and the cost, the management portal is actually pretty nice. Just go to your subscription level and look at the cost analysis. But then just one tip, I guess just organization. I'm big on organization and naming, making sure everything is organized in a good way. Your subscriptions, your resource groups, and everything has good naming, because that bugs me so bad. If it's, you go to search for a resource and there's 3 or 4 different resources with that same name, but they're different types of resources. So like, here's an app service, then here's its key vault, and they all kind of have the same name, and they can have the same name in those cases because they're different resources, and it just bugs me a little bit.
How do you like names to be done? We'll say a resource group.
Usually, so what I've been looking at so far is, its function, what is it doing, the environment, and I like to, I guess, a suffix of what type of resource it is. So then like a -rg at the end of it. Like a lot of Azure stuff, they want you to put it at the beginning, but then, if you're looking at a particular thing, and you sort it alphabetically, then all your resource groups are together, rather than, the specific app, app 1, have that at the beginning, and all that stuff is put together if you put it in alphabetical order. So usually put it at the end, what type of resource.
So in your previous role, how did you handle the naming? So because anybody could create, like someone else on your team could create a resource without that naming scheme. Did you have to like tell the team? Did you have like documentation that said, hey, here's how we create resources in the naming schema we use?
I've been in a couple of different situations where it's different. One place had a naming convention and a document to go with it. This is how things are named. And, we may have put some Azure policies in place to enforce some of that. Actually, I did. I did an Azure policy to match their virtual machine naming convention, which was fun because they had a lot of different variations, and depending on what it was. So you can enforce it with Azure policy, or at least having a document. And then I've been places where kind of a free for all. That was the place I was talking about. They didn't have. There's a generic one. Hey, this is kind of what we name things, but nothing official really. And people just named it as close as possible to something else that had been already created. So it's been a range of things.
That's interesting. Do you think that an Azure admin can rest on their laurels, or do they need to consistently keep learning about Azure and the new things that are coming and the changes? Or do you think it's static enough to where you can kind of chill out?
Oh, no. I mean, there's constant, and it can be overwhelming to try to keep up with it. So, don't worry. Don't worry about that, but do, make conscious efforts to keep track of, the main things, I guess, or, what you're working on, because there are so many services. There's stuff like Azure Data Lake, Synapse, data factory or whatever. I know nothing about that stuff, so I'm not going to keep up with any of that. Don't use any of it right now. But keeping up with network changes, compute changes, some of the core things there are definitely things to try to keep up with.
Yeah, I think finding a community that can help you sort of understand when big things pop off. Also, I think following the PMs on socials can be pretty helpful.
Mhm.
A lot of times Microsoft PMs are active and communicative, and you can sort of get an idea of the vibe of things that they don't always put in the official blog post, which is helpful for some things because, decisions are made, changes happen. So that can be pretty helpful. But yeah, my experience was that it can be kind of a lot. And I think a lot of parts of IT are like that, where you can get overwhelmed by the amount of data that you could consume, and the amount of changes and all that stuff can get to be a lot.
Yeah, and there's good aggregators or some people out there. There's like Azure feeds, and people will put together. Here's stuff that's coming out, and it's just one single kind of places you can go to. If you're an Azure admin, you don't know who John Saville is. Savill. Every Friday he comes out with here's what's new in Azure. Depending on how many things come out, it'd be 5 to 20 minutes. And you can skip through and focus on the stuff that you want to know about. And yeah, I just follow some people on social and certain feeds, and if something catches my eye, just kind of read up on it and tuck that away. Be like, okay, I think here's something new or whatever. But yeah, it's a lot. So I just focus on what you're working on and just keep an eye out for the new stuff coming through as much as you can.
Yeah. John Saville is really awesome. He has a great resource. He's actually a chief architect at Microsoft. I think that a lot of times it's really helpful to hear from the people who are actually working at Microsoft, though. A lot of times they do have a bit more info than we do as outsiders.
Yeah, I just came across 2 people on YouTube. They're doing Azure Terraform stuff, and they both work at Microsoft. I was like, okay, these are good people to follow and keep up with what they're doing, because they probably very opinionated on how to do Terraform in Azure, and because they're there. So yeah, finding those type of people, I think are super helpful.
Yeah. Who is your favorite tech YouTuber? You can't say yourself.
Right. I think probably John Saville over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Just because his whiteboarding and just he doesn't do a lot of demos or anything. It's a lot more conceptual things in his whiteboarding that he does. But just being able to understand Azure from that's where I've gotten so many things. And you'll still go back and watch some stuff again just because you kind of forget after a while. And his exam preps that he does for Azure certifications are just they're superb.
Good call out there. Link to his channel in show notes. You love Terraform. You work in Terraform. It's your job. You're a professional. What do you like the least? What bugs you the most about Terraform and working?
It's some of the stuff is just limited, and being able to, maybe it's just because I need to learn a little bit more about it, see some more advanced things, but being able to dynamically do some things in it, because coming from like a scripting world, you can be like, oh, if this is like this, do this and this, and you can really write out the logic on it. Some of that stuff within Terraform is difficult, or just being able to navigate the resources. And when you're defining or creating resources, trying to match up what this thing is and matching up into the actual deployed resource. So, but it's just sometimes some limitations because it's not a scripting language. So there's those type of things in there. There are basic if statements, like I mentioned before, and being able to do some looping and everything, but you can come up with some really creative things sometimes that seem kind of hacky or whatever to make it happen. So I wish some of that was just a little bit better, but overall it's pretty fun to just write some configuration and tell it to go deploy it, and it goes and creates a whole bunch of stuff. That's always fun.
Yeah. Big power, big responsibility.
Mhm.
It is fun though in IT when we can work on systems that do more than just the one thing that we're doing. Like we can do one thing and it can go out and continue to exist, can redeploy, can be used for other things. It's the same kind of concept I think with blogging, where it's like it sort of builds on top. Like you create this one thing and it keeps adding value and it contributes to the whole blog as a resource. I personally my brain starts geeking out over that kind of stuff. Love automation.
Mhm.
Love IT in general. And you know what? I've loved this chat, and it's time for our common parameters. The first question I'd like to ask you, Jeff Brown Tech, is what is one time something went wrong while on the job, and how did you handle it, and what did you learn?
Something went wrong. Yeah, my
Terribly
favorite.
wrong.
Terribly. Yeah. Was doing a file share migration, and copying data from the new server to the old server. And I used some like GUI version of Robocopy because it was multi-threaded instead of just running one Robocopy or whatever, maybe opening up multiples. But it didn't copy over all the permissions. So this was early on in my sysadmin career, which I know better now. My regular account was a domain admin, so of course I could hit the share, and my boss could hit the share, and we're like, okay, thumbs up, we're good to go. But no one else could access it. So pro tip out there, if you ever find yourself in that situation, Robocopy does have a flag where it will copy permissions, but not the file. So we started running Robocopy again. We figured this out to copy all the permissions over, but didn't have to copy the content again. You're muted.
Interesting. I did not know that. That's actually a pretty good pro tip for the people out there. I had no clue you could just copy the permissions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next question. With your knowledge now, what's one tip you would give your younger self?
Early on, when I made the transition to learning tech, I took some programming courses. I was like, oh, this is really cool. I don't want to sit and program all day. And now all I wish I could do is sit and program all day. So I wish I had learned programming more and kind of stuck with that a little bit more. But literally, like I won't say my dream, but my goal at the time was just like, hey, if I could, sit and repair computers all day, that sounds pretty cool. So I didn't focus so much on development. So I wish I'd focused on it a little bit more.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I definitely thought computers were the coolest thing in the world for a while there. So I'm curious to see if you end up becoming a programmer and making that next dream come true. Because I think that the DevOps experience will certainly be helpful and could definitely be a kind of a transition.
Yeah, I think I'm in a good opportunity where it will just make me a better DevOps engineer, just knowing the development process and being able to look at their code a little bit more. And I'm already seeing that. I'm like, okay, this might be the next thing I really need to focus on. And I would maybe have the opportunity to actually put it into play and use it every day.
Nice. So you could see yourself really enjoying just digging into code every day.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that'd be fun. What's your IDE of choice?
VS Code.
Yeah. Easy question. That doesn't count. Yeah. All right. The last question. What are 3 of your favorite modules? No wrong answers.
Oh, modules. I don't use a ton of modules, which might sound weird. Like I guess the Azure module, because that's one of my primaries that I use all the time. That's a good question.
Not MS Graph.
Well, I was about to make that joke, not MS Graph. Because, and I'm glad I'm not alone, because actually there's a sysadmin thread on Reddit being like, just recently, it's like, does anyone else think this is really bad? They're like, yeah, it's not great. So yeah, not that one necessarily, but yeah, that's what's funny. Like I use modules for my daily work of just like Azure, the Azure module, the AZ module, or some of those very specific, but I don't do a lot of like customization. Like somebody might have a module to do something crazy with their IDE or, display something on the screen. I'm very vanilla in a lot of the things that I do and keep it very plain and simple. So I don't know what this is about me, but
what is your prompt? What's your prompt? Is it just the current location?
That's about the only thing I do is I change the prompt just to show the current folder I'm in, just so if I'm in a long path, it doesn't take up room. I'm a minimizer. Small icons, very few things on the prompt, just showing me the current folder. I see some people's like, oh, that looks really cool, but it also looks really distracting to me. So I keep very, very minimal. That's the first thing I do if I ever get a new, system, Windows 10, 11 or whatever. I'm like, get rid of all these icons off my taskbar, hide everything. I'm very minimal. I don't like to see it.
Okay, but you have a profile that is setting this prompt, so that is a start. Is there anything else in your profile other than just setting the prompt? Be honest. I respect it if you don't.
It depends. I'll sometimes have, like in a previous role, I had some custom functions to do different things, like for Exchange server or whatever. But now I'm curious. I'm going to pull my profile up.
Windows computer?
Yes.
Me and Jeffrey Snover are on Macs, so that's all right. I kind of wish I was on Windows again.
Well, that's just one of those things. I started off in a Microsoft shop, Active Directory, Windows server. But if you were like, hey, we're all going to Linux tomorrow, I'm like, okay, it's just another tool to learn and to use it.
Yep.
Yeah. What else do I have? Oh, I wrote a custom function that I have in my profile back when I was doing a lot of PluralSight videos. Actually, this was back in Cybrary because I was keeping track of how long my videos were. And there wasn't anything, if you do like get item, child item on a video file, it showed you how long the video was. There was no properties. So I came across somebody who had something written. So I wrote a function to kind of wrap around it, and I could pass it in one or more files, and it would output the duration, how long the video was.
Hey, that's a cool little function. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone out there for listening to this fantastic interview. And if you're on your DevOps journey, Jeff, people want to reach out to you. Where can they find you on the World Wide Web?
The website, jeffbrown.tech. I'll have some links there, to LinkedIn or X. I have other social accounts. I don't check them that often, but LinkedIn is probably most often one that I check. So shoot me a connection request there. And if you're not on there, message request on, Twitter, X, whatever. Usually those are the main ones I check, I guess, anymore. I'm still haven't caught on to all these other ones that have been proliferating out there, but
I'm pretty sure LinkedIn is the new spot. I think it has the most people, and you still get like pointless posts in your feed though, where it's like random popular video accompanying unrelated text. It's like, oh, come on, people. Why do people keep resharing this? But I think it's okay for like professional stuff. But Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to tap in on a deeper level, you can check out the PowerShell scripting channel, the PDQ Discord, discord.gg/PDQ. I'm in there. I'll see you there. Your PowerShell Summit this week. Come up and say hello. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Appreciate it. It was great to talk with you.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.